All right, the Secretary General is on a plane heading back to New York earlier today. He spoke at the opening ceremony of the Boao Forum for Asia Annual Conference 2018. In his remarks, which were distributed to you, he said that globalization is irreversible. It has brought many benefits, he said. Hundreds of millions of people have risen from poverty, but vast numbers of people are being left behind. He stressed the need for a fair globalization that leaves no one behind as a pathway to build peace and sustainable development. But the Secretary General added that we won't make globalization fair by isolationism, protectionism, or exclusion. Global problems need global multilateral solutions, and our contributions to a fair globalization is the 2030 Agenda. The Secretary General said that there is another challenge that we can undo all our best efforts to end poverty and promote universal peace and well-being, and that is climate change. This is a global threat in itself and a massive multiplier of other threats that is moving faster than we are. He said that we need to dramatically raise our ambition, adding science demands it, the global economy needs it, and humanity depends on it. Before leaving Boao, the Secretary General also met with Shahid Abbasi, the Prime Minister of Pakistan, as well as the Prime Minister of Mongolia in separate meetings. You will see on Syria that overnight the Secretary General issued a statement in which he expressed his outrage at the continuing reports of use of chemical weapons in Syria and reiterated his strong condemnation that the use of chemical weapons against civilian population. The seriousness of the recent allegations require a thorough investigation using impartial, independent, and professional expertise. In that regard, the Secretary General reaffirms his full support for the Organization of the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons and its fact-finding mission in undertaking the required investigation into these allegations. The fact-finding mission should be granted full access without any restrictions or impediment to perform its activities. The norms against chemical weapons must be upheld, he said. The Secretary General appeals to the Security Council to fulfill its responsibility and find unity on this issue, and also encourages the Council to redouble its efforts to agree on a dedicated mechanism for accountability. He stands ready to support such efforts. Meanwhile, the UNHCR said it was particularly concerned about the situation in Douma, where tens of thousands of civilians remain trapped. UNHCR estimates that more than 133,000 people have fled eastern Ghouta over the past 4 weeks. This is almost 3 times the number it was reported on March 20th. And Panos Mumtsis, the regional humanitarian coordinator for the Syrian crisis, said today that over half of the Syrian population has now been displaced and is in need of humanitarian and protection assistance. And we're trying to get Mr. Mumtsis to speak to you by video conference before the end of the week. Back here, the Special Envoy for the Great Lakes, Said Djinnit, briefed the Security Council this morning. He said that negative forces, including the Allied Democratic Forces, continues to attack and terrify the population, causing suffering and displacement and fueling mistrust between countries in the region. He also added that the Democratic Republic of the Congo, despite progress in preparations for the elections, tensions persist between the government and the opposition, that in Burundi the political human rights situation remains of great concern, particularly as the country is heading towards a referendum for constitutional change. Human rights violations and impunity remain central to the instability of the region. Mr. Djinnit also stressing that the humanitarian situation in the Democratic Republic of the Congo and the region requires greater attention. While progress is slow for peace, security, and cooperation, framework agreement is still yet to fully deliver on the expectation it raised. It remains a vital tool for which requires greater political will, the Special Envoy said in his remarks have been shared. On Libya, our human rights colleagues warned that in a report published today, the armed groups in Libya, including those affiliated with the state, hold thousands of people in prolonged, arbitrary, and unlawful detention and submit them to torture and other human rights violations and abuse. Since renewed hostilities broke out in 2014, armed groups on all sides have rounded up suspected opponents, critics and activists, medical professionals, journalists, and politicians, the report said. Hostage-taking for prisoner exchanges or ransom is also common. The report, which was published in cooperation with the UN support mission in Libya, UNSMIL, calls on authorities to publicly and unequivocally condemn torture, ill treatment, summary executions of those detained, and ensure accountability for those crimes. And Alain Noudelou, the humanitarian coordinator for South Sudan, strongly condemned today the killing of an aid worker in Bentiu in South Sudan's Unity State. He called for an immediate and unconditional release of 7 others abducted by armed groups in Morobo County in central Equatoria State in South Sudan. At least 99 aid workers have been killed since the start of the conflict in December 2013 in South Sudan. Most of those victims have been South Sudanese. And you saw that yesterday we issued a statement in which the Secretary General stressed the importance of global efforts to address climate change at the meeting being held in London this week of the International Maritime Organization's Marine Environment Protection. He added that given the increasing vulnerability of all countries to climate change, policy and market signals need to quickly align to encourage the maritime industry to make the needed transition towards zero net greenhouse gas emissions. And I want to flag that our colleague Miroslav Jenča, the Assistant Secretary General for Political Affairs, was in Jakarta yesterday and today, where he met together with the ASEAN Secretary General Lim Jokoy. He co-chaired the ASEAN UN Secretary-to-Secretary meeting and a meeting between the UN and the ASEAN Committee for Permanent Representatives. Mr. Jenča stressed that the Secretary General's prevention agenda and recalled his call for a quantum leap in cooperation between the two organizations at the 9th summit that took place in Manila in November, and he impressed upon the ASEAN counterparts the need to expand and deepen cooperation with regional partners to tackle today's challenge. We've issued a note to correspondents on that. Press conferences tomorrow. Our guest at noon will be the Executive Director of the Counterterrorism Executive Directorate, Michelle Konix, and she will brief you on the Counterterrorism's Executive Directorate's latest trends report called The Challenge of Returning and Relocating Foreign Terrorist Fighters, Research Perspectives. She will be accompanied by CTED's Chief of Branch, or David Sharia. Also, we've been asked to flag the multimedia event entitled Second Generations, Things I Didn't Tell My Father, with Israeli cartoonist and illustrator Michael Kishka, which will take place tomorrow in Conference Room 1 from 10:30 to 12. Mr. Kishka will share his personal story as son of a Holocaust survivor and describe the creative process which led him to write and draw graphic novels on the same name. You're all invited, and let's stop there and take some questions. Masood.
Thank you, Stéphane. 2 questions. One is about this UN report on the Libyans who have been, tortured every day in the prisons by these various militant groups, and the report says that it's just that those are unrepentant, these killers, and that how can these people be brought to justice can the UN bring those people to justice is the question.
I think the point of our efforts in Libya has been towards political reconciliation, to try to help the state to ensure that it is represented throughout the territory, and by helping to create and bring new institutions, by helping in building institutions, part of that is to ensuring that there's justice and that those who are who've committed these crimes, be brought to justice. It is important to shed light on what is going on, and that people be held accountable, and that those who have authority condemn these actions. Your second question.
Yes. Do you have any? What I'm saying, any mechanism to bring these people to justice at all?
Well, there is the mechanisms that currently exist in Libya, but it is very important to have to ensure that political stability returns to Libya. Yes, sir.
Bonjour, monsieur. Deepak Arora from the Tribune Online. You just mentioned that Secretary General in his remarks said that globalization is irreversible. Mm-hmm. Now, you see instances in the modern world where different countries are opposing embargoes and trying to look at from their perspective. So what exactly is UN and Secretary General is doing to stop this kind of trade war?
Well, This is exactly the message that the Secretary General has been passing on, that we need global solutions, that globalization has had tremendous positive impact on the world. Obviously, there have been some downsides in terms of inequality, which is a great concern of his, but that the answer to today's problems are for member states to work through existing mechanisms, to work on global solutions, and not to retreat into protectionism and isolationism. Madame.
On Yemen, there was airstrikes that by the coalition that killed about 13 Yemenis. Do you have any comments on that? And also regarding the humanitarian efforts there. Thank you.
Sorry, what was your second part of your question?
Yemen.
The efforts of Mr. Griffiths are continuing. In terms of the latest airstrikes that we saw in the last 24 hours, we're not in a position to independently confirm the incidents, but obviously any reports where we see civilians hurt, where we likely see civilians targeted, including children, are extremely concerning. And I think what we're seeing in Yemen is continuing violence, continuing suffering of the Yemeni people. The civilians are carrying the brunt of the military actions that is ongoing in Yemen. And again, we reiterate our call for cessation of violence and encourage all parties to rejoin the political discussions. Abdelhamid, then Olga.
Thank you, Stéphane. Sorry for coming late. Do you have any update on the visit of Mr. Mladinov to Gaza?
No, not anymore, but we can see if there's anything more we can share with you. Olga.
Thanks, Stéphane. It's been 2 days already since the chemical incident in Douma in Syria, and you were telling us, as well as Stéphane de Mistura, that UN has no one on the ground and no independent ways to find out what happened after 2 days. Do you have anything new?
I think
did you request the information?
You've seen that the OPCW is sending a fact-finding mission to Douma. It is critical that they be given full and unfettered access. This tool, the fact-finding mission that the OPCW won, is a critical one to establish whether or not chemical weapons have been used. It is a tool of a treaty-based body that member states have signed up to, and member states who've signed on to this body need to respect the work of the body and need to facilitate its work. The missing piece here is the accountability, and that's exactly what the Secretary General was saying in his statement, is that we have the fact-finding, but we need the other piece, which was supplied in the past through the Joint Investigative Mechanism, no longer exists. And the Secretary General's strong message to the Security Council is to ensure that there is accountability, and he encourages them to find unity, to recreate a mechanism through which accountability could be attributed.
Can I follow up on that?
You may.
Does it mean that Secretary General welcomes the U.S. draft existing in the Council, that the Council will be voting this afternoon?
The Secretary General is not taking sides on any drafts. I think if you look at what he said in his statement, he calls on them to find unity and encourages Council to redouble its efforts to agree on a dedicated mechanisms for accountability. We all need, the international community, I think, is waiting for accountability on this use on this reported use of chemical weapons. So we have half a tool, right? We have the tool through the OPCW that allows us to establish the facts. The facts are a very important part of it, but the other part is that of accountability. And it's up to the Security Council for all its members to find unity and agree on a text. Masood.
Thank you, Stéphane. Just a follow-up question. Is there any timeline to OPCW report on this Duma?
I think that's a question for the OPCW. They've announced, I don't speak for them, they've announced they will be sending the mission, but that's a question for them.
Okay.
Yes.
Can I follow up on that, please? I was just wondering to clarify whether the OPCW fact-finding mission has the mandate to attribute responsibility to a party.
No, it does not.
Thank you.
Also follow up on that. Do you have more information about whether they left already? Are they going through Damascus? And
I will. They've put out a press release with media contacts. Again, we don't speak for them, but we can share with you the information they've put out.
Okay, so I have a follow up on that. I know that you said that you don't have, you cannot clarify whether about the attack. As an independent organization. My question is whether you have people on the ground or anyone. I know that you have been delivering, trying to deliver aid, and it was not.
We've not been into Duma recently, and especially since these reports of attacks.
But do you have anyone there?
We're not in a position to establish the facts as to whether or not chemical weapons were used. We are extremely concerned by the reports, by the videos that we've seen of civilians, of especially children. Facts need to be established, and as I said to Olga, the accountability needs to be established as well. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Stéphane. Please allow me to switch from crimes against humanity in Syria and Yemen to crimes against the press in Egypt, where the editor-in-chief of the news website Masr al-Arabiya was arrested by the government plainclothes alleged security forces, and they seized all the computer equipment, the the news agency feeds in the headquarters, and arrested
the editor. I know that I've seen the reports. What is the question?
How the Secretary General feels the continued attitude and the practices of the Egyptian government against the press, which is a continuation of a pattern.
We've expressed our concern about the limited political space that we've seen in Egypt, including recent arrests and detention, and we're continuing to engage with the Egyptian authorities on this issue. Thank you very much, Halas, and have a wonderful Tuesday. Thank you, Walter.